Okay, hello and welcome, Outperformers. Really good to have everyone joining us again for another stage of our webinar series. And I have the lovely Yogita Nath with me today, who will be joining us and talking on a very, very interesting topic, and I think a topic that will be extremely relevant for many of the people on the call and in our community, and that is succeeding in a multinational matrix structure, dealing with all of the complexities that come with multiple countries, different reporting lines, and all the fun stuff that comes with that. And I'll introduce Yogita in a moment, but just so everyone's got time to start coming into the webinar, as I always do, a little bit of context. We've had a really busy couple of weeks with the Outperformer. We ran our Future of Finance conference the last couple of weeks, and that was a really fun experience for us. We certainly brought in some of the best minds we could into our community's discussion, and talked everything artificial intelligence, robotics, influence, and everything that seems to be very topical and mattered to our community in terms of development and their career management. So really, really powerful experience. For anyone that's new and this is the first time that you've been hearing us, we run these webinars roughly every week to 2 weeks with very interesting CFOs, executives, leaders, and people that we're generally inspired to listen to, who've got some really interesting stories to share and some real experiences. What you'll hear from Yogita today will be, I guess, a bit of a glimpse of not just the glory stories, but the challenges and everything that comes with reaching success and navigating a career through this particular topic. So for everyone that's on the call, thanks again for joining us, and we'll get stuck into the conversation now. But Yogita, first of all, thank you very much for sparing some time for us today. It's been awesome to work with you, and I've known you for a little while, but for some context, Yogita has had a wonderful international career with the likes of Foster's, a little stint with Johnson & Johnson, and now with a very interesting organisation, Alexion. Now, I won't tell her entire story. I might let Yogita do that. But Yogita, thanks for joining us. And if you might provide some context on who you are and a bit of background, that'd be a great start.
Sure. And thank you for coming out all the way to the northern beaches today.
Yeah, we've travelled today. For anyone that's watching and knows a little bit about what we do, we're off out of the city, and we're up in French's Forest, so
yes.
It's been cool.
Yes. So I'm with Alexion Pharmaceuticals at the moment, which is a pharmaceutical ultra-orphan business, US listed, multinational, very, very global. I've been with them for 4 years. I'm Senior Director of Finance, and my scope and span is Australia, plus the Asia Pacific region. So we have, in addition to Australia, we have China, we have Taiwan, South Korea, Hong Kong, and Japan as well is rolling into us at the moment. So very varied region. Before Alexion, I think you mentioned I was with Johnson & Johnson for a little while, also for the pharma division, but very different in terms of style and output and ways of working as well. And then before that, I guess my longest stint in my career has been with Foster's. Foster's no longer exists today, but once upon a time it was an Australian giant for alcohol, in terms of beer and wine. Now it's been spun off into the beer division, which is owned, which is foreign owned now, and Treasury Wine Estates, which is listed on the stock exchange. So I guess my sort of journey in terms of multinational and matrix to a certain extent began with Foster's. Many years ago. I started off with them as a reporting analyst, and what really attracted me to the role at the time was that it involved global travel.
Yes.
So for someone who was in their early 20s, at the time it was like win-win. Going to the wine division at the time, traveling the world. So we had vineyards at the time in France and Italy, and when I shortly upon joining them, we made acquisitions in the US as well, which was the Beringer Blass acquisition. And then it fosters for me the analytical role evolved quickly into more of a managerial role in the wine division. Very lean, very sort of. It was the sort of the poor cousin of the beer business at the time when I first started with them. But we very quickly went on an acquisition trail. So, we were this tiny little Australian office acquiring Beringer Blass, which was one of US's finest at the time. And in terms of people in the office, we had working on these sorts of deals and acquisitions. There was myself, the CEO for wine at the time, Jamie Odell, who was, I think, just recently retired from Aristocrat. And it was just a handful of us doing big things and just having fun along the way.
Awesome.
Yeah.
It's a pretty consistent theme for you, actually. You've had a growth story here as well.
Yeah. So, with Foster's, just finishing it off, I moved. I was expatriated to the UK.
Yes.
For a while, for about 4 or 5 years. And then came back home, had a brief stint with Johnson & Johnson, and then moved to Alexion. And Alexion is in many ways very similar to what I experienced with the wine division at Foster's. Very fast, very innovative. You're constantly thinking on your feet, and you're growing.
Yeah. Both
very big growth markets. So and that whole multinational, multi-matrix structure. However, the matrix component in particular is more prevalent here than it was in Foster's.
Yeah.
I think Foster's, we were the head office,
yeah.
and you're expatriated to another country, whereas here we're the small region who reports into to the US. So the challenges are quite different.
Usually.
Yeah.
So maybe, and that's a really good starting point for anyone that's listening to grasp the fact that you've played from a few different angles on this multinational career journey. But I guess when we look at the structures, before we can talk about dealing with them, it's really interesting to look at the nuances and the way these structures play together. So maybe if you can just highlight the multinational experience, what the structures looked like when you were over expatriated to in the UK with Foster's, and also what you play with now for some context. Sure.
I guess if I think about my time at Foster's, when I was based in the UK, the region I was responsible for was EMEA. And essentially my reporting line commercially was into the managing director there, and then functionally I had a reporting line back to Melbourne, which is where the head office was. And I think having been out of the Melbourne office and being Australian, you're very much aware upfront of what the expectations are, certainly from a head office perspective. You go to a local office, of course, it's a different culture, it's a different way of working, it's a different style, but they're both Western worlds in terms of, you've got Australia and the UK, very, very like-minded in a lot of ways in terms of how we do business. Alexion, however, a similar structure in terms of the fact that I report into the regional VP here for JPAC, and I have a hard line into the deputy CFO in Connecticut. So that sort of outlook and way of working is quite similar, but obviously what we have that's very different here is our region in terms of Asia.
Yeah.
And we've got various general managers in country who I partner with, different cultures, different languages, different market access challenges. So it's a whole new experience in terms of how we do business there.
And I guess for you, it just keeps evolving too, doesn't it?
Yeah.
As each country comes on into your territory,
exactly.
You keep bringing on new stakeholders to deal with.
Yes, very much so.
So the complexity increases, but we'll explore that in a little bit more detail. So for me, this is where the meat is, and this is where I think there's a lot of learning in this. With the structures you've worked with, and I think reflecting on it from an accounting and finance perspective, what are the common challenges you see people in the organisations you've worked with come up against when it comes to dealing with matrix reporting lines and I guess the structures you've seen?
I think, and most finance professionals who currently are in multinational matrix structures or who do a lot of strategy and planning and analysis type roles, this will probably resonate with them. It's the managing of expectations. So you have you'll have a stakeholder, which is usually a corporate office, who will set you a target. It could be your top line in terms of your revenue growth. It could be your restraints or constraints around operating expenditure, could be a cost of goods, anything like that. And then, you know, you're trying to manage that with your local stakeholders. You know, and naturally, by the way, they do business, they're more optimistic, generally more optimistic than, you know, conservative, some conservative finance.
Kind of
right?
comes with the territory, doesn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So I think it's a good, healthy, natural tension. I think anyway. It promotes good debate and discussion. You know, the commercial guys will put forward a very robust and strategic and optimistic view, and you know, you have the finance guys like myself who come in with a little bit more of a conservative view or more of a challenge, I guess.
Yeah.
So that's a big one. I think aligning those expectations, and of course, you know, we are the custodians from a compliance perspective as well. And when you have a broad region like ours, when you're not there firsthand from a language and legislation perspective, you have to be very mindful of that, particularly in our industry. The other piece is around time zones. That's quite challenging as well. We have head offices in the US, so you'll often get calls done very early on in the morning or very late at night. But then, you know, the guys in Asia generally are sort of towards the afternoon and whatnot. And so yeah, that's quite challenging. So work-life balance is sort of a little bit not.
Does it exist?
I think it's about, what did you use? I think you
harmony. Work-life harmony.
Exactly, exactly. You say work-life harmony. So often I'll you know, I would have done a couple of calls in the morning from home with the US before I drop my daughter off to school, sort of thing. But at the same time, I can drop her off to school and take my time driving into work, beat the traffic. So you know, there's win-win around that.
Okay. So really, so managing expectations, which I think is consistent when you look at multinational or any other matrix model where there's multiple business units and different pressures at play, but obviously the geographical piece. I think for anyone that's worked with a US head office or a head office somewhere else is difficult. So they're quite normal. But when we look at you know, this managing of expectations, because that's really where a lot of the challenge comes from, isn't it? There's these techniques that I'd like you to take us through that you apply when it comes to not only managing expectations but dealing with the pressures of time. What are some of the strategies that you use to manage the leadership in the business and drive strategy and execute on the goals that you're trying to achieve?
That's a really good question, and I think it's not an easy it's not easy what we do in terms of aligning those expectations. So I think your relationships play a very key part of that. You know, so there's obviously the formal lines of communication and hierarchy in terms of reporting lines, etc. But there's also a very important network of stakeholders. I think that you can use from an influence perspective. So often, for example, you know, let's go back to the targets. Targets managing that in terms of expectations, commercial and corporate. You know, you're constantly having. Well, I'm constantly having lots of informal chats, whether here it's locally or with the US, and being a facilitator in terms of, you know, why is it that we can't meet that, or how can we meet that? What will you give on? So it's a facilitating and negotiating role. It's very clearly outlining, you know, what the impact would be of a short win versus, you know, a longer hit strategically. I think the buy-in piece as well. You know, if you have a solid relationship where you're able to have that natural tension and you're able to put forward pushback. I think, you know, we have to push back in a lot of cases, but you need to be able, in a lot of, I know it took me a while to be able to feel safe to be able to push back. You need to be able to understand, need to be able to understand what the consequences are as well. And by that I mean, you know, is this, yes, it may be fine commercially, but it may not be okay from a compliance perspective. And it could impact your relationship with the stakeholder.
Well, yeah,
you know,
that's
so it's a very fine balance. But I think if you're empowering others around you to be able to have that conversation with you, and you're educating people, sort of your peers and up above you in terms of what the risks and opportunities are, and you've got a good, strong relationship, that healthy debate is always going to go a long way.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So practically, if you think about, so the relationship part you really honed in on initially in that point part there you made. When we look at the relationship itself and developing that, you talked about sort of having these informal chats.
Yeah.
How does that play out? Is that a quick phone call before a meeting, or is this something a little bit more is there more strategic time invested in that?
Well, it's a bit of both actually, and when I do a fair bit of travel in my role, so once every 6 weeks or something like that, it's a trip to Asia, and a lot of time is vested getting to know the team then. I think I would know almost every employee in our Asian markets. They're not large organisations, but I know everyone on a one-to-one basis. And often they don't get people come out see them. So it's the dinners, it's a drink or something like that. So I think it's investing that time. It's in the downtime that you're building that. And then the formal relationships in the US, I think when I first started here, I invested a lot of time, just those early morning phone calls, those Skype calls. It was just this wide circle and getting to know them as much as possible.
Yeah, great. So, just for anyone that's on the call, if there are any questions, please fire them into the question blocks. I know Yogita will be very happy to answer not only my questions but yours, and certainly would encourage you to get as much value out of this conversation. So, in terms of strategy, right? We're executing strategy, and for you, this is we talked about the countries that you're covering in your region right now. There's quite a bit going on. How do you look at the different countries, different functions, bring everyone together, and I guess adapt to different styles, but equally keep everyone on the same page? What are strategies used to keep people aligned?
I think in terms of goal alignment and clarity, that's very important. Making it clear up front who's responsible for what. But I learned a long time ago that you can't just tell people what to do.
Yeah, exactly.
That's never going to work. So I think being aware of your own style and who you are. So we've recently set up quite a number of business operations. We've set up 2 companies from scratch in South Korea and Taiwan, and we had cross-functional teams globally setting that up, and I led both projects. And we had the formal team, and we had the meetings late at night, and the call-outs. But it was the in-country visits, it was the informal chats, it was making it clear up front to people that if there was an issue, this communication, it could be caught earlier on rather than sort of So it was very much a risk and opportunity mindset as well, in terms of flag it. It's a safe zone, and it's fine. We'll go with it. And I find that often people will be reluctant to flag it just in case there's a consequence or a negativity associated with it. So
So you're working to get them comfortable.
Yeah.
How important is it to have a mindset and I guess this sort of flexibility in the way you think about issues as well? I guess when you're dealing with different cultures, different types of people, you need to not only there's different different approaches you would have, I would imagine. How important is that?
Very important. Very important. I think and we've seen it I've seen it in Alexion in particular. It's a very fast-paced environment, fast growth. And we often have people, very experienced, very well-regarded people who've come in from other aspects of pharma, from all functions. But it's an extremely different way of working here. You're constantly diving into the detail and then stepping back and making sure it works from a strategic perspective as well. And we're very lean here, so we have to do a lot of the doing ourselves.
Yeah.
And sometimes people, it doesn't sit right with people from a fit perspective. If their style is more of a delegation one, because there is no one to delegate to.
There's no option.
Yeah. So I think that sort of learning agility and adaptability is crucial here. I think I've done things at Alexion that I hadn't touched in the last 10 years or so of my career before here, because there was a team who would do that sort of thing for you. So, yeah.
Interesting. And I guess one of the things we always talk about in a lot of these conversations, but I think it's interesting to look at this from a multinational point of view or a matrix structure, is embracing other functions, right? So you talked about relationships. Now, how much do you try and encourage your team and yourself to really immerse yourself into these other parts of your business? Or is it because they're far away, do you sometimes accept that they're doing what they should be doing, or maybe predict that they're doing what they should be doing?
I think it's the former. We are completely immersed in the business. It's less so from a financial control perspective. I think financial controls are a given.
Yes.
That they're the nuts and bolts of an organisation. But from a partnering, from an analysis, from an insight perspective, we essentially are the go-to people to drive that forward. And you can't be doing the doing without understanding the business. So whether it's for us it's market access. We don't have a health economics team here, so we do all the commercial modelling and whatnot in-house. With finance does that. It could be negotiating a new deal with a distributor, a logistics provider or a third-party distributor, 3PL in Asia, and we work with legal to draft the contract, and then we're in front line next to the VP actually doing the negotiations. When you're doing that, you're very very immersed. And in China, for example, we're looking at going commercial shortly, but there's a whole heap of regulatory things to get through to get there. And again, you have to know what's going on.
You have to know what's going on.
Yeah.
So tell me, you've talked about things you've got to navigate, but what do you personally find really challenging, and what do you find other people find really challenging with those issues?
I think it's a lot of stretch, and you're juggling a lot of balls. You're going to miss some, and it hurts when you do. And I have missed a few at Alexion, and sometimes sometimes you can fix it. You can retrospectively, but other times it hurts you. It may hurt your bottom line. But that's something we have to live with. Ultimately we are a lean structure, and that's bound to happen.
And how often, when I know you say it hurts.
Yes.
How personally do you take it? Is it something that you see as a team thing, or is it, or do you feel as the CFO that this is something you really take responsibility for?
I think I do take it fairly personally. We were looking at pulling together our annual operating plan last week, and the teams made a massive effort, and we got there in the end. But was it the slick outcome that we would have liked to have? Possibly not. But the team did a great job. But for me it was a personal. We could have done. I guess in terms of that's sort of an ongoing output from a finance perspective. But when you have you're trying to negotiate a new drug and get access for it for patients, and you've put in a lot of work in terms of pricing and reimbursement or commercial modelling, etc., and that doesn't come through, and the patient hasn't got access, and at the same time you're like, oh, it impacts my growth as well, so it becomes quite personal.
Well, you're passionate too, aren't you? You love what you do.
I do. I do very much so. Yes.
I love it. So guys, as I say, if there's any questions, I'll just be taking them through online here. But there is something that has come through, and sorry for guys for leaning in, but I do need to see my screen. How do you this is a good question from Andrew. How do you maintain open, healthy relationships with matrix stakeholders when you don't get the opportunities to travel or see them face to face? And I'm sure you get that a little bit with the tyranny of distance.
Yeah.
Can you share how you work with that when you haven't seen a stakeholder for a long period of time or at all?
Sure. So we have a number of instances where our shared service providers are based externally, are offshore, and we obviously work with them extensively. So it's regular catch-ups via Skype. So you're seeing them on an ongoing basis. It's telephone catch-ups. It's also we can't always go to them, but we try and get them to come to us.
Yes.
Every so often as well. I mean, again, there's budgetary constraints and restraints around that. But otherwise, it's that ongoing Skype and telephone conversation.
Yeah, and in 2017, you would think technology can bring this closer together. Do you find Skype is far more impactful when it comes to developing those relationships compared to a telephone call? Certainly better than email, of course, and we always encourage this relationship. but do you think Skype has the right impact when you can get it working?
Oh yeah, I think it's awesome. Yeah, I mean it's. For us, we have our shared services is based out of Mumbai and out of Dublin, and that it's very impactful there. You can have a very healthy dialogue and discussion as well on Skype, and have a laugh at the end of it. And you can see expressions and you know how it's going. Whereas phone sometimes get, if it's a TC and you can't see how the message is being received, but particularly in different countries, and you've got the cultural nuances coming in, slight slip. So I think Skype is awesome.
Yeah. Absolutely. I'm a big fan of it myself. When it comes to, and guys, as I say, any questions, fire away. When it comes to someone who hasn't been in this sort of environment before, so it might be earlier stage of their career and haven't worked in a multinational, or perhaps have worked in more locally focused organisations, what's some advice that you would provide to someone to set themselves up for success in a matrix model or a multinat?
I think role clarity is really important up front. Often you'll have people who are, particularly in local organizations, they're seen as finance. Sometimes in some organizations they're seen as a bit of a blocker as well. We have the keys to the purse strings to a certain extent. We have the controls and compliance. We police that. That's how we're perceived sometimes. So I think it's important to get that role clarity, and if you have the opportunity to be able to make sure that you do all of that, yes, but you also a value-add partner. And you have a lot to offer.
How do you go beyond it?
Exactly. Networking is critical. There'll be your reporting lines, dotted or solid, but the more people you get to know in terms of who can create influence for you, and that way you can flex your influence muscle, I think is important. And I think just being able to be a little bit more open. If I think about my early career, I was mostly out of head office, and you become quite used to working a certain way, mostly within your function as well. If you're there, but if you've got an opportunity to get a transfer, whether it's interstate or into another division, I think I'd be grasping that with
take
both hands.
advantage of it now and prepare for it.
Exactly.
And when you joined Alexion 4 years ago, one of the things we were talking about earlier was that you pretty much straight away got on the plane, and obviously as a CFO you would expect to do that. But how you talked about, we've talked a lot about this relationship stuff. When you look at that first 3 months, how much of your time was spent getting to know people around the organisation?
I would say 80 to 90%. Getting to know the people, getting to know the products, and by no means any close to knowing them any more than what I did 4 years ago. But the product and the disease. So the disease education product, and that was extremely critical. The numbers came later. It was about who people were, what their expectations were. From me, from my team, cross-functionally, aligning those, and the numbers came later.
Interesting. And you obviously, we talked about the UK before, so that was your first stint overseas, correct, with Foster's. What did that do for you as a professional, as far as your growth as an individual and also from a career development point of view?
I think it was, at the time, I must say when I first got there, I was expatriated at a very young age. And relatively inexperienced, and like I said, most of my experience had been with Australian head office before then. And I think understanding the challenges of a local market, building that stakeholder network, it was a challenge. It was scary at times as well. And you're in it's a slightly different culture as well. So you've got to pick up on the nuances there. But I think if I think about learnings, you know, it's the ability to become self-aware and become adaptable, and that it took me a while to do that.
Yeah,
you know,
okay.
that rigid sort of way of thinking, and you know, opening up to a more broader mindset in terms of what are the sales folk thinking, what is marketing thinking.
And you had a mentor at that time, correct? That I don't know if that helped, but
Yeah.
What sort of role did that play? Or, you know, when you talked about becoming more self-aware, was there a bit of a jolting moment, or was it more of a gradual awareness of what was important to be effective in that environment?
I think it was a more gradual sort of realization. It was more around presentation and therefore how I appeared to people and networking. There was a certain formality, I guess, before, and again in a corporate environment, I think sometimes it comes naturally. Whereas when you're in a local office, I think you need to relax, or I was told I needed to relax a little bit more, and open up a little bit. In fact, I remember my mentor telling me, "Why aren't you smiling? You know, you should smile. It's like when you say hello, you should smile." And I said, "Oh, fair enough." And it could be about you know, how you sort of asked your questions, you know, a little bit more open rather than very pointed, that made people go yes or no sort of thing. So yeah.
And you, in terms of working with that mentor, how long was that relationship? Was that something that evolved over time? Was it sort of a short, sharp sort of involvement with that person?
Well, he was actually appointed as my coach.
Okay.
So Michael probably worked with me for about 4 to 5 months.
Yeah, awesome.
So it was a once a fortnight sort of catch up.
Brilliant.
It's very good.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Brilliant. So I think for anyone online, there's a lot to be said about getting that third party support.
Yes.
Do you still work with anyone, or do you have those sort of informal people that you call on for a bit of advice?
Not so much formally at Alexion. I mean, I think I've got a good stakeholder network. I had good connections in finance. Some of whom have moved on as well.
Yeah.
So they're quite supportive there. But no, I haven't really done that in recent times.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. We'll step on a little bit further, and I think for some of the people in the audience, this will be a really interesting conversation. That is that Yogita probably hasn't harped on this as much, but you've moved out of a traditional CFO's chair in this role, and I guess for me, you know, that a lot of that, as we've used the word executing strategy, that's been a key part of it. Can you tell me what that has involved, but equally, you know, how much you've needed to learn and grow to move out of a traditional CFO function?
My experiences at Foster's actually was quite invaluable, I think. As a finance person there, I had a lot of exposure to acquisitions. So I was on a number of due diligence teams. I did a number of integrations as well while I was with Foster's, Beringer Blass and South Corp at the time, purely from a finance perspective.
Yes.
So that sort of project skill, that project management skill sort of was developed there. And then my last role at Foster's was demerging the beer and wine business and getting it listed on the stock exchange.
Yeah.
At the time as CUB and TWE.
It's a huge project.
That was a huge project,
Yeah.
and you know, it was at the time was directly exposed to CEO and a wide variety of stakeholders. And with Alexion, I think when we look at when I look at some of the things we've done here, setting up countries, for example, South Korea and Taiwan, it's that skill's been invaluable in terms of the project management piece. You know, clarity, getting clarity and goal alignment sorted up front. But there's been a lot of learning as well. You know, so for example, finding the right office location in Taipei or finding the right location in Seoul.
Yeah, you don't do that every day.
No, and you know you're working with real estate there, or appointing a GM. You're working with HR and, you know, shortlisting and interviewing and getting down to the final two. Then you're presenting them to your VP. And then the other big thing that was really interesting, that I found really interesting, was setting up distributor and logistics providers in those areas. You know, you're negotiating your front line and you're doing that yourself, sort of thing. So I think that project management skill set was invaluable.
Yeah.
But you know, knowing your business is critical. I think that was very helpful, and just being aware of your style and personality as well, and adapting as you.
The project management piece is really interesting. If you had your time around again, would you have tried to pick that skill set up earlier, or is it something that you thought you picked up at the right time?
I think I probably did pick it up at the right time, and it was harnessed at different stages at Foster's. So I sort of did it in my early years out of Melbourne with the acquisitions, and then I went and did the traditional finance role in the UK, and then came back to Melbourne, to home at the time, and then did the demerger. So it came back into, so it was. It's a little bit of toing and froing.
Well, the interesting part, it never really disappears.
No.
And that's the interesting part we see so much now is, and I think for anyone on the call, there's so many organisations experiencing change and requiring that leadership on projects or transformational activity. The sooner you can pick that up, the better.
Yeah, exactly.
The advice for someone stretching into that GM space, now you talked about some of those skills. Is there any advice you would have if someone is a finance professional, believes they want to stretch out, maybe hasn't had those opportunities? What advice would you offer to them in terms of you know, maybe setting themselves up for the future?
If there are assignments available, whether they're short-term assignments, you know, if you're in the pharma space and you can get a stint with the health economics guys, if you're in FMCG and you can do a little bit of commercial modelling, if you're in financial control, I think any on-the-job learning that's available, any opportunities, I would be grabbing that with both hands. Again, it's about capacity as well. You know, how do you manage that with your ongoing day-to-day and do that sort of additional, I guess.
But without stretching, you won't go forward, right?
Exactly, and I think I have been fairly lucky in my career where I was given the opportunity to do that. Sometimes there was backfill provided if I was sent off to do an acquisition or integration, but sometimes there wasn't. So you know, there's a balance.
And do you think, and this is where you have this conversation with a lot of people, there are times where you look at it and you say, well, I was lucky, but there was probably a reason the work came to you. Why do you think those sorts of opportunities were given to you at the time, and what sort of reputation had you built in the business?
I was always very vocal about wanting to do more, and I still am, according to my VP. I think if you really want to and you put your hand up and you know, but you've also got to be able to deliver. And you know, at a company like Alexion, we're quite lean in that. You know, we have a direct line into the CFO or the CEO, etc. So when the sun shines, it shines bright. But if there's something not going quite right, then you're also very visible. So you've got to be able to take both, I think.
Take both and handle the risk that comes with it, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So guys, as I say, we've got a bit of time with Yogita. If you wouldn't mind, we'd love some more questions, but equally I've got a few up my sleeve anyway, so I'm not short of them as people have got to know over the years. I might just do a bit of a reflective type question with you, if that's all right.
Sure.
So if we went back in your career and you started again, and this is from perhaps the day you left school,
Mm-hmm.
would you do anything differently?
The networking, I think I would try and pick up earlier, if I could. And the thing is that I think about myself leaving uni as a young person. I was very, very shy. And so, you know, and starting off a new job, you've got your. I was in an accounting audit type environment. You're starting off. It's a checklist of things you're doing. You're the junior there. But you know, I think in retrospect, if I would have been a little bit more savvy and a little bit more open from a network perspective. So we have a program with the Uni of New South Wales here at Alexion, and we have a couple of interns come to us every 6 months or so. And the confidence and the savviness that, you know, that they bring from a social intelligence and emotional intelligence perspective, I look at them and I say, I wish I'd been like that all those years ago.
Amazing, some of these kids coming through.
Exactly.
Exactly. So you'd work on the networking piece. Is there anything else that you would, you know, in terms of, you know, I think we were talking about mentorship a little bit. Would you invest? You know, you had that presentation coach. Do you wish you had that earlier?
Yeah, so I had my coach in the UK in London, but I've had very strong mentors. I wouldn't say that I even knew they were mentors at the very start of my career. I think my first or second job, and I still keep in touch with him, a guy by the name of Shane Gannon, and he was a very strong mentor for me, and you know it was really about. Here's the opportunities, here's what you could do, and it made me very aware of the fact that the commercial savviness or the business know-how wasn't restricted to sales marketing, for example. You know, I was able to contribute. So I think but the fit is very important as well.
Yeah, I was going to say, how important is it to find a leader or work for a leader, in your opinion, that allows you to explore? You know, do you think, you know, I guess you had Shane. Was that manufactured? Was that a strategic choice to work for someone like Shane, or do you think you got lucky?
I think I got very lucky. But I've had, you know, similar conversations with some of my peers, etc. And I think some people are quite upfront in saying, you know, I look upon this person almost as a role model, and I see a lot of similarities in terms of style and where I want to be in terms of where they are. So I think if you find someone who you think's a good fit, then and you can approach them and they've got capacity, then that's awesome as well. Yeah.
Is it useful? We're obviously talking about today's topic in a multinational environment. Is it useful, particularly early in your career, to have people that safe house over in the other countries or in the other environments that you deal with?
I think so. I think you know, sometimes when you're in a multinational based out, well, let's say Sydney, you're not on all the calls because the time zone differences, issues, etc. You're often getting feed a little bit later, or in retrospect, and sometimes you can get forgotten about a little bit. You can't be visible to everyone. So if you have a voice who represents you to a certain extent and your priorities and your potential, I think that's important.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. Look, we'll start to wrap up now, but to leave the audience, and I think everyone's been it's been quite a big audience today, to leave the audience with some general career thoughts and comments around the way they tackle their career, and we've got some pretty passionate people that get involved with the Outperformer. What are a couple of last minute pieces of advice you would leave for anyone navigating their career to the CFO chair or the sort of work you're doing?
I think you've really got to like what you do. You've got to be passionate about it. Earlier on, if I think about some of the things that I was doing, it was valuable. It was extremely valuable. But once I got into that space of really enjoying what I was doing and who I was working with as well, you know, it becomes a pleasure almost. You know, and I think that's really important. The networking piece is really important as well. And I think an open mindset, sometimes in terms of capacity, and you're trying to balance work and life, and sometimes it doesn't always go hand in hand. So that harmony thing also is very important. I think that sort of open mind is critical as well.
Yeah, good.
Yeah.
It's really good. Harmony.
Yes.
Harmony. It's difficult to get everything going, but I suppose one of the better things that we might call it is life, right?
Absolutely.
It's just life,
Yeah.
and if you're passionate about what you do, you'll certainly get a lot out of your career. And I think for a lot of people, if there's anyone on the call that's in an environment that perhaps doesn't get the best out of them, it might be an indication that you're working in a space where there's not as much purpose, and you really want to look for something that gets you out of bed in the morning and gets you excited. Guys, first of all, thank you very much for everyone online. I really appreciate you all joining us. If anyone does want to have a conversation on the career management side of things afterwards, the survey will come out, and we're very happy to have a discovery call with you about that. Anything personal that you'd like to navigate through, that's certainly something that the Outperformer team offers. But more importantly, I want to say a huge thank you to Yogita, who has been really generous with your time, but really generous with the thoughts, the openness, the ideas that you've shared with us today. Prepared to be a little bit vulnerable and share what you like and what doesn't work. But of course, I think it's within those challenges and those honest conversations that we learn so much about, the normality and what's real about a career. And ultimately, it doesn't matter how senior you are, we're still people, and we still have to work with other people. And ironically, a lot of these conversations that we have, they come back to the same principles. No matter whether we're dealing with a multinational or we're working through other decisions. So huge thank you, and
It's my pleasure.
Really appreciate it, Yogita. So guys, we've got our next session actually tomorrow. We're going to be talking about strategic leadership and the personality traits that come with becoming a strategic leader. And I think if you listened really carefully to what Yogita was talking about today, being a finance leader and CFO is really about strategic leadership. And in this day and age, organisations, as Yogita said, are not necessarily expecting financial control to be anything more than a hygiene factor, something that is expected of your finance function. So strategic leadership and understanding what traits are going to be best to tap into in terms of your personality and the things that you prefer to do, enjoy doing, or might need to work on, is what we're going to be talking tomorrow about with the team at Thomas International. So really would encourage you to enjoy that if you're keen to work in a leadership capacity. For anyone else, there's going to be, take a look at the webinar list. There's plenty coming up this year and next year. We've got some really, really good speakers coming up. So thanks again, Yogita. Thanks to everyone online.
Thank you.
And we'll see you all next time.